So I'm Kath McLoughlin. I'm team leader for the community engagement team with Hunter Local Land Services, and it's my pleasure to host this session of the day's proceedings. So the theme for this session will showcase the current on-ground works and community partnership projects that are delivered by agencies across the Hunter catchment. So from weeds to water, we'll hear about innovative methods for to best manage some of the more challenging aspects of our landscapes. And we're kicking off with presentation one from a gentleman from my team, actually, Matt Kennedy, who's our Regional Weeds Coordinator with Hunter Local Land Services. And he's going to be presenting on riparian weed management across the Upper Hunter. Thank you.
So while my presentation title won't quite fit, I've got little subheadings throughout. So weed management is coordinated across the region through the Regional Weeds Committee. So that's set up by Hunter Local Land Services under the Local Land Services Act as a regional advisory group. And under that committee, we have a subcommittee, the Hunter Weeds Technical Team. So the committee's members are from local control authorities, our state and other agencies around like Hunter Water, so some of our corporations, as well as community groups such as land care and landholders, as well as other interest groups that can be represented. The committee provides a forum for the community and different stakeholders to come together and be part of that decision making on weed management for the whole Hunter region, so that it's not done in isolation. We develop up a lot of documents on communication and education, awareness programs which are based on local or regional priority weeds, depending upon where we run that program and which partner organisation we're working with. Our main function of the committee is to develop and coordinate the delivery of the Hunter Regional Strategic Weed Management Plan. I just call it the Weed Plan. That lists the priority species for the Hunter area. This sets out what management category a weed is identified for a whole region, so not just a local patch or the state. So we're talking there an eradication weed, the containment weeds, the asset protection weeds, and that gives it that management category across our whole area, which takes us away from focusing on a local council area or a local patch and gives us a wider context of why we're undertaking that work and what outcomes we're looking for a whole system, say, in a river, versus a localised impact that's being mitigated. As part of this then, it allows that LCA the local control authority, your councils mainly, to think about the wider impacts and enforce that control a bit better. So one aspect of the committee's recently done work on is we develop up individual weed strategies or groups of weed strategies, such as the Hunter Region Chinese Violet Management Strategy. That's more impacts on the lower Hunter. We also have the groundsel bush management strategy, which would directly impact the Ramsar listed wetland systems in the lower Hunter, as well as other areas in the upper. And throughout this, we've recently developed the Hunter Aquatic Weeds Eradication Strategy, which is the one pictured here. This strategy sets out every location of all eradication water weeds within the Hunter region. So that's your map you can see in that picture. And it sets an inspection and a treatment program against every single one of those sites with our local control authorities set to enforce that. We set a priority of management for that for each site, where for higher down to low, being that they are still an eradication site, so they're still a high priority weed, but it's got a low priority amongst its peers. We fund then, this year and next year, we've funded every high priority site for its dedicated inspection and treatment project. So that's up to 4 times per year per site, set out so that we're beating it before it reflowers or seeds into that next generation, trying to break a seed cycle and manage that plant out of our systems over a 5 to 10 year period. The medium and lower priority sites still are expected to be inspected and managed, but these aren't then funded. There's up to the local control authorities, the councils, how they are funded, or whether they push the compliance onto a landholder to undertake that. But this plan then sets a backbone of what's an expectation of a landholder who has a site and how they should be managing that plant out of that system. Some other projects to show a regional approach, I've highlighted a few here. So while informally this is not a dedicated project in itself, all these little projects are adding to the overall value of the work that we're doing here. So one way to show this is the green cestrum work occurring across the Hunter region. So you can see in the map there, like I've very loosely chucked some circles around it, but each of those circles represents a project site or area that's directly been funded out of my programs. And that will either be a partnership with some of these sites of the local land care groups that have talked today, some of them are the local council, some of these are national park sites. But you see how overall we are reducing a significant amount of weed burden from the tributaries, particularly there, that flows into the Hunter River. We're not working directly on the Hunter River at this stage, except for up in the very top left there, you can see the Goulburn River National Park with a project there working at the very top of the Hunter catchment on all of our high priority weeds. So we're taking rid of that weed source at its very top of the catchment to have those flow-on effects. The intent is to significantly reduce green cestrum in the waterways to reduce the overall weed burden being placed into the Hunter River system. And so regeneration activities are more resilient and controlled by efforts by landholders and not undermined by that continual seed rocking back up. The project aims for localised eradication in some instances and others for a significant reduction. We're not thinking that we're going to get rid of green cestrum entirely out of the Hunter. That's an unrealistic expectation. We set the expectation at localised eradication in certain patches where it can be managed out, or significantly reducing the availability of the plant to lower that availability of seed to continue downstream. So while we can clearly see there's gaps in the program along this river system where there's not knowingly control occurring, the project does add to the overall localised control and puts an LCA, so your local control authority, in a position for years to come to undertake compliance on then reluctant landholders where their work was not being incurred. And the other priority, while the project focuses on green cestrum, all high priority weeds are also targeted. So that's worked into the contracts with the partner organisations that anything that has an eradication status under the Hunter Regional Weeds Plan is worked on while you're on site, and it's taken out of the system as well, with other priority weeds, so our lower end ones targeted based on their density and time and effort required to get them out of that system. Green cestrum is chosen as a focal weed due to the riparian nature of the plant. So you do get it in pasture settings and you do get it in bushland, but it is really restricted to that riparian zone for the large amount of the plant. This allows us to highlight to both livestock enterprises, because there is a known risk around green cestrum, the impacts that it's having on them and how the work done can reduce the impacts on their cattle production and their livestock production, but also lets us push towards land care groups and other conservation groups to highlight the great work that can be done in riparian zones. So that lets us pitch this project and the outcomes of this project to very different groups, as well as everyone else in between, to try and get a common bond of why we're managing that landscape for a different, even though there will be different outcomes we're all trying to achieve. Cool. Another approach taken to weed management and the function of LLS is capacity building. So the Regional Weeds Committee puts a real focus on education and capacity uplift of peoples of the Hunter. We kind of have a three-tier approach to this. We've got general level where it's for everyone involved, where we've got grass ID, pasture management workshops, invasive grass management. These all key into better management of land that eventually all runoff will flow into our river systems. If they're managing that bare ground better, if they're managing their chemical inputs or their fertiliser inputs better, then we're getting less impacts on that river system. We do machinery hygiene to reduce the weed spread around our region. We have our councils that attend shows and other regional events like Tocal Field Days and highlight weed management and identify plants. Then we have the next level up where member organisations of the Weeds Committee undertake prohibited matter and water weeds training courses. This is so they can inform best practice back in their organisations and further spread best practice weed management across our entire Hunter area. Our LCAs are very important in compliance and regulating and being the point of truth for weed management. So they undertake higher level training on compliance, but we've got a very functioning Hunter Weeds technical team that shares policies, documents and planning so that we're all giving consistent advice and have the same advice that we would give you or the same direction on a weed across the entire region, rather than it just being different between council areas. So my take-home messages was, while we are working in localised area, our focus is regional. All of the projects we've heard of today have a regional impact, even though they are achieving a localised outcome. Encourage and promote weed management everywhere and to everyone. It's everyone's responsibility, and any action or inaction has that flow-on effect downstream. You know, I've touched on compliance, but the more people are talking and encouraging their neighbours to be good land managers, the less we'll need compliance, and we'll have everyone jumping on board with what they need to do. Join and be active members of community groups. We've seen today how those groups can achieve good results, and they're also used as networks for information sharing via government organisations and a lot of other entities. Cool. A reduction in weeds has many outcomes. These can be social, environmental, or production. They do not exclude each other, and reducing weeds such as green session on cattle property will give us production outcomes, but also have flow-on effects for river health and reduce weed seeds. This can be applied to all of our weeds in management of the hunter. Sweet.
Thank you, Matt. That's excellent. It's really interesting how it doesn't matter what our target outcome is for our projects, it always seems to come back to the committees, to the collaboration, to the partnerships. And I guess in Matt's weeds management space, we are also looking at that balance between the compliance and the relative advantage to the landholder of being able to treat those weeds in that space and being able to present that to their neighbours, as Matt highlighted. So next up, we've got John Simpson, who is a water quality scientist from the Hunter Water Corporation, which is another one of our partners in the Hunter River management space. So welcome, John.
Afternoon, everybody. So whilst I'm working for Hunter Water and talking about Hunter Water today, people that do know me will know that I've worked around the valley in both a professional and personal capacity since about the mid-80s. But today I'm going to talk about Hunter Water and give you a bit of a snapshot of activities that Hunter Water is doing in its area of operations, which is not of interest to everybody because our jurisdiction, if that's the right word, is focused on the lower Hunter. Which I'll show you in a minute, rather than the upper Hunter, even though some people get confused and think that we're a resource regulator and we're Water New South Wales and we're DPE Water, but we're not. We're a utility that provides water and wastewater services. So the key drivers for Hunter Water, and Hunter Water has had a significant cultural change within the last 5 to 10 years, is our corporate strategy that talks about customer and community engagement, about being a trusted organisation, delivering valued services, all the sorts of things that you're probably used to hearing from all sorts of organisations. But I think they mean it this time. I hope so, and that's what when we're trying to lever off that. That's for sure. So we have this corporate strategy. Importantly, I think, is the commitment to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, of which there is 17, and Hunter Water has identified about 12 that are relevant. We have an operating licence, which goes for 4 or 5 years. It keeps changing. And it has conditions in it. And one of the first conditions is, in terms of drinking water, that we have to implement the Australian drinking water guidelines for drinking water supply, and that's very, very important. So the operational area, as I said, is the lower Hunter, Newcastle, Port Stephens, Dungog, Maitland, Cessnock, a little bit of Singleton, and this little lake down the bottom here that we're not talking about today, but it has a life of its own as well. And also, this is taken from our corporate strategy, so it's got the approximate traditional owner boundaries on it as well, which are also important to Hunter Water at this point in time. So there's 2 major areas of operation at Hunter Water where improvements to waterways can result. I've got 3 points there for those that can do the maths. There's the dirty brown stuff, water and wastewater and stormwater, and then there's the blue stuff, the drinking water catchments. People don't like talking about the dirty brown stuff really, and that's why we're called Hunter water instead of Hunter wastewater. But wastewater is where most of the money goes and where most of the money comes from. And the third point is a bit of an elephant in the room for some people. The Lower Hunter Water Security Plan will be a major project in the future. It's not approved yet. The document's been released and there's been a lot of public consultation about it. So I just wanted to, and there will be on-ground works and there will be some impacts on waterways, in particularly the Paterson River and the Lake St Clair Glennies Creek Dam, if and when it gets approved. But that's a work in progress, and that will happen in maybe 10 years' time if it gets approved. But I just wanted to put that up there for transparency, but I certainly don't want to talk about that today. So in terms of the brown stuff, if you like, we have a waterways improvement. There's a bit of interchangeability of terminology that we have. But in terms of the what we're calling the waterways improvement framework, that's focused on wastewater management and stormwater management. The drivers for that are water quality in the waterways where the wastewater treatment plants discharge to, the maintenance of flows in those waterways, and some of them are in the upper reaches are ephemeral, where the wastewater treatment plant would make them perennial, so we need to recognise that, for both environmental purposes and for irrigation purposes and for ecosystem health. And then from a stormwater management point of view, Hunter Water has carriage of a few stormwater drainage systems in Newcastle and Lake Macquarie and Cessnock, and the work around those stormwater systems has been primarily about building flood resilience whilst improving public amenity and livability, and also some biodiversity benefits. So in terms of wastewater, the Hunter River Estuary Wastewater Master Plan there's not a lot happened there yet, although Hunter Water is investing tens of millions of dollars at each of the major wastewater treatment plants in and around the lower Hunter to cater for population growth that is happening now. So the long-term strategic direction for those major wastewater treatment plants in the lower part of the river is to reduce nutrient inputs into the waterways, to improve the ecosystem health and community livability, to increase the use of recycled water that's generated in effluent from those plants, and to be a valued contributor to the stakeholders that live in those areas. So this is just a map of those locations: Shoreland, Raymond Terrace, Morpeth, Farley and Curry Curry. And then there are a number of wastewater treatment plants that discharge into the upper section of the river, which also impact on the river, and we also need to be cognizant of when we're doing our planning, two of which are in our drinking water catchments at Clarence Town and Dungog. So they're a focus of our attention as well. And this one here, which is, whilst there will be significant upgrades to those projects in coming years, one project that's worth focusing on, where we have done some catchment investment works, is at in the Conjiwai and Corribalong catchments in relation to an upgrade to the Paxton wastewater treatment plant. So the project was a collaboration between Hunter Water and the EPA, but also with the landowners in the catchment. So it was developed to offset nutrients that would be discharged into the creek system from the wastewater treatment plant. And so instead of investing in engineering works at the treatment works, a nutrient offset scheme was proposed and was delivered through local land services, in partnership with local land services and the landowners in the catchment, and Hunter Water has done a lot of work and still is doing a lot of work with Local Land Services as the organisation that has those skills in management of the rural community. So there were 19 projects: riparian fencing, offstream watering, riparian zone planting and erosion management. 21 kilometres of stream bank condition improved, 16 k's of stock access management, 54 alternate water points. Riparian zone rehabilitation. The target nitrogen reduction was doubled, and the phosphorus reduction was 10 times what was anticipated. So that was quite a good outcome. In terms of stormwater project, that was based on, or is based on, a willingness to pay survey that demonstrated that customers are willing to pay a couple of dollars in their bill to improve amenity around the stormwater system. So it's only about a kilometre of rehabilitation in the current 4-year price path, but it's costing $11.6 million. It's a lot of money for a short section of stormwater path. And the locations are, as you can see there, a couple of examples: Lambton Park, which has already been done, and in town at Newcastle, that is in Cottage Creek. The Catchment Improvement Program is our drinking water catchment management program, and quite a lot happening there, as you can see on that slide, but I want to focus on the Tilligra Riparian Improvement Project, the Dairy Effluent Project, and the Seam-Weirpool Project. The Tilligra Riparian Improvement Project was a project where Hunter Water sold the land that was earmarked for the Tilligra Dam project that was refused. So we put a covenant on the land before it was sold, and the landowners are on board. We've established riparian buffer zone along 24 kilometres, both sides of the river, with shade, weed management, off-stream watering, etc. And the Dairy Effluent Project was a 5-year project, again in collaboration with Local Land Services. About half the dairies in the Williams Valley took it up. In that project, we took up, that resulted in approximately 18.5 tonnes of nitrogen captured and reused per annum from the dairies, and 4.3 tonnes of phosphorus, with an annual fertiliser value of $110,000. And some pictures there. We didn't just stand around and with our hands in our pockets all the time, but there were some agronomy advice and field days and incentives grants to subsidise farmers to upgrade their dairy infrastructure to redistribute the nutrients on their properties from their dairies that would preclude the need for them to be buying fertiliser. And the last one I wanted to talk about was the Seam-Weirpool Erosion Management Project, which is a major project which is happening at the moment. It's about to kick off. It's been, for those that don't like regulation, it's been the subject of an interagency working group. So we've spent the last 6 years trying to agree on an erosion management plan and get the Minister to approve it. That's happened, and we're about to start work next year if we can get some landowners signed up to it. There's some major erosion on the Seam-Weirpool where Hunter Water draws the majority of its raw drinking water from, that goes into Grahamstown Dam. And so the idea to remedy the erosion issues and improve the deteriorating water quality is to do some engineering works, preferably soft engineering, but there might be some hard engineering depending on materials to improve that water quality. So that's a work in progress as well. I could talk just about all day on this subject, but 10 minutes isn't very long, and I've already gone over time. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of some of the things that Hunter Water is doing in and around the catchment areas to improve the condition of the river and water quality in it.
Thank you, John. It wouldn't be a field day if you didn't have a photo of a whole heap of backs and hands in pockets. It certainly brought us to a full circle moment, from the beautiful imagery that Joe provided earlier of the child playing, the drinking the water and it becoming part of us. Now we've got the brown wastewater to deal with as well, so full circle. So next up, we've got the lovely Molly Walker, who's Coast and Estuary Officer from DPE Water. She is going to be presenting on environmental water in the Hunter and Paterson rivers. Thank you. Molly.
Thanks, Kath. Hi, everyone. My name's Molly, and I'm Coast and Estuary Officer at DPE, actually EHG, not water, but we're going to be merged soon anyway. It's all good. And I'm here to chat about something a bit different. So we've heard a lot about riparian restoration and flooding, and this is kind of about, in those times where it's not flooding, the water that we can be releasing into the environment to support the environment. But first of all, I just wanted to draw your attention to the fantastic artwork that's been on the side of the wall here from the amazing Alison Worry. So this artwork was commissioned by DPE and is a representation of the environmental water release that we did in June of this year. And for those who don't know the area, that's Liddell Weir, and it represents the Australian bass migrating downstream over Liddell Weir with the help of some environmental water, and was undertaken on Wanneroo country. So just wanted to thank Ali for this fantastic piece. And if you're ever at the DPE office, yeah, please, yep. And if you're ever in Newcastle, this should be hanging by the end of the year at the DP office in Newcastle. So I wasn't sure where everybody was at with environmental water, so I thought I'd start at the beginning and just provide a few quick definitions. So environmental water is very simply just water that belongs in the river, wetland, or floodplain. So it's not for irrigation, it's not for agriculture, it's not for drinking water, it's simply water that belongs to the environment. And I've just put a little QR code there for an official kind of DPE definition that goes more into about the Water for the Environment program generally and those definitions. Then secondly, what is an environmental water allowance? So this is the specific type of environmental water that I'm going to be talking to you about today. So an environmental water allowance, or an EWA, is a form of planned environmental water that's set aside in a water sharing plan. So it can't be redistributed for any other purpose, it's just for the environment. So in the Hunter Regulated River Water Sharing Plan, we have 20 gigalitres allocated as EWA. And in the Paterson, we have 2 gigalitres. So the 20 gigs is stored in Glennies Creek and Glenbourne Dam combined. And then the 2 gigalitres on the Paterson is stored in the Lostock. And importantly, there's no rollover between water years or financial years, so the water doesn't accumulate. And again, I've just put a little QR code to the website. So we've got a small section, the Hunter Paterson has a small section in the entire Water for the Environment program, which is a statewide program, if you'd like to know more about this region. Okay, so let's get into the purpose. So what can we use the EWA for in the Hunter? So there's 3 reasons. The first is to assist in the management of critical environmental events, so like algal blooms or chemical spills. The second is to provide flows to maintain ecosystem health, so that's pretty broad. And then finally, and quite uniquely, it's to support water-dependent Aboriginal cultural values. So there's not many other regions within the state that has that stipulated in the water sharing plan. So it's a really exciting opportunity for the Hunter. So these are the Hunter purposes, and then the Paterson, there's even less restrictions. It basically just says in the water sharing plan, unless otherwise said by the minister, you can use your EWA in line with your long-term priorities or something along those lines. So I just thought I'd share with you some of the objectives we've been working on for the draft Hunter Paterson long-term environmental water plan. There's about 20 objectives we've got so far, which perhaps could be a little ambitious, but I just wanted to share with you the higher priority ones that we're going to be focusing on or hope to be focusing on. So there's 2 for native vegetation. So that's to maintain the extent of native riparian veg and to promote recruitment of that vegetation. There's 2 objectives for native fish, and so that's to provide and or support opportunities for native fish breeding or for fish movement and migration. There's one for just ecological health generally. So the objective is to support lateral and longitudinal connectivity along river systems. And then finally, our Aboriginal cultural objective, so to support water-dependent sites of Aboriginal significance. Okay, so where are we at? So we're in the very early stages of managing the environmental water allowance for the Hunter and Paterson. And there's two main focus areas that we've got. So the first is establishing an environmental water advisory group. So this is a group that's appointed by the minister that is to advise our team and environmental water managers on how to best use this allowance. So we've currently got our appointment pack for our chairperson sitting with the minister's office for approval. And then once we have our chairperson, we can get the recruitment for the members underway. And it's great that a big theme of today has been collaboration, because the types of people on EWAGs that we'd like to see, include water and ecological scientists, First Nations reps, community members, enviro groups, water users, and then of course relevant government representatives like Water New South Wales, Fisheries, LLS, etc. And then secondly, we've been working on our draft long-term environment water plan. So we've got that sort of 80 to 90% of the way complete that I've sort of been working on in the past year. And I'm just finalising some of the last of the environmental watering requirements, which basically are the nuts and bolts of the how much water you need for each particular asset. And then this year we completed a water release in June, like I said at the beginning, to facilitate downstream migration of Australian bass over Liddell Weir to support spawning in the Hunter Estuary. And this met 3 of those draft objectives. So I just thought I'd elaborate a bit on that release. So for those who haven't seen it, this is Liddell Weir at a high flow. And there were a few things that we needed to make sure happened for this release. So first of all, we wanted to simulate a natural flow event. So what I mean by that is mimicking a rain event, the catchment gets saturated, the peak in the water rises and then slowly falls back down as the rain would recede, like natural. Second of all, we had to wait until the water temperature fell below 15 degrees consistently. So this normally happens around May or June during the year because this is a temperature cue. So according to the literature, Australian bass move downstream to spawn in the Hunter Estuary when the water temperature gets below 15 degrees. Thirdly, we needed a minimum water depth of 300 mils over all key fish barriers. So Liddell Weir is a key fish barrier, which equates to about 500 megs a day. And just for reference in this picture, that's about 1,000 megs a day. So the minimum would be half of what you're seeing. And then finally, careful management of receding flow rate. So what I mean by that is you don't just drop the water level really fast. You do that quite slowly so that you don't cause any bank slumping or bank erosion. Okay, so I'll just go through some of the preliminary results. So the final report from the University of Newcastle was provided to us actually this Monday, so we hope to have that published soon. So the dark blue is the flow at Liddell Weir, the yellow is the minimum, that 500 megs, the red is the fish counts at Liddell Weir, and the light blue is the fish counts traversing Jerry's Plains Weir, which is another weir that we thought perhaps might be a key fish barrier just upstream of Liddell. So the majority of the monitoring was completed by the uni, which I previously stated, using sonar camera technology. And they obtained fish counts in total, but these counts I'm presenting today are just the fish that actually traversed the barrier, because that's what we were interested in to see if this release worked. So the majority of the fish were approximately 25 to 30 centimetres long, which is consistent with Australian adult bass. And we successfully facilitated downstream migration over Liddell Weir in line with some of those objectives. Because as you can see in this red line, there was very small movement, very low movement before and after release. And the highest fish movement was actually during the peak of the release. Interestingly, fish were trying to migrate upstream as well. So even though the literature said that they should all be moving downstream at this time of year, they were observed to try and jump the weir upstream. And as you can see in that first dot point, one actually made it, but then was washed straight back down again. So the reasons for this are not clear, but I think everybody in the room here would appreciate that ecology is quite complex, and to try and answer that question, we'd need a lot more than just the monitoring that we did. And I'll just quickly touch on the monitoring we did at Jerry's Plains Weir. So we found that this really was not a key fish barrier for this size fish class. Because as you kind of can see, the results are a little bit backwards. Low flow and after the release had the highest fish movement, whereas the peak flow had the lowest. So that kind of, the reason we think that this is because the camera was perhaps not placed in the right spot. It didn't capture the actual length of the entire barrier. But just from standing there and anecdotal results, it wasn't really a key fish barrier for this size class. And just finally, I'll just touch on the fact that while I was there, I did see a pair of white-bellied sea eagles fishing. So I think that ties really well into the theme of the day and the artwork from Ali, that all of these environmental and social benefits from releasing water into the environment, they just can't be documented. The ecology is complex, and it's great that we have this opportunity to support the environment like this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Molly. That was very enlightening, and there will always be one that tries to swim upstream. Doesn't matter what species we're talking about. So while I invite the other panel members to come up, I will just sort of come back round to the fact that, I'm sure there are many people in the room who will be trying to get details of our speakers and things. Do just walk up and ask for them. It's not going to be taken, in any other way than there's plenty of opportunities with all the speakers throughout the day, of opportunities to collaborate and opportunities for, involving them on the next project. So I will just open it up to questions. If there's anyone who would like to ask a question of John, Molly, or Matt. Oh, down the front here, Laurie.
Thank you. I don't often get to ask questions. John, in light of Cameron Archer's comment this morning with regard to regulation and doing it and, working with people, you made the comment about the CM Weir pool and the 6 years of preparation, and I'm guessing that's through various agencies and government departments. Are you allowed comment that if you spent that 6 years just working with the local landholders, could you achieve something the same or better? Thank you.
People that do know me know that I would comment anyway. Thanks, Tony. That's a great thanks for a couple of reasons. I'll answer your question in a minute, but it's a great segue to finish my talk because I didn't want to cut into Molly's time, so I didn't talk about the key messages, and that was the reason. But like everybody else this morning, I totally agree that forming partnerships and collaboration and engagement with stakeholders in the community is the way to go. I've done, and Hunter Waters' approach is engagement and education. I've done a bit of work with the rural police unit, and I talk to them, and they say to me, I'm an authorised officer, I can fine people for polluting water and dumping rubbish, and they just say, just fine them, they'll get the message. And I say, well, that's not the way we want to do business, and I don't think that's a sustainable approach in the long run. Yes, people get the message fairly quickly, but it also builds up a sense of antagonism against authorities, and I don't want to be that person that people resent when I'm out there trying to run a program and build empathy in the community. So I'd rather try and work with the people to educate them, to build awareness, promote the benefits, and encourage people to do the right thing. That's what we're doing with one of the extension project from the dairy effluent project, which I didn't talk about, which we call the Sustainable Agriculture Project, or the Four Valleys Project, the Chichester, Williams, Paterson and Allen project, where we're doing extension work, we're doing education, we're running grazing management courses, we're breeding, LLS is doing all this, I'm paying for it and LLS is doing all the work, breeding dung beetles at Tocal to distribute them around the valley for water infiltration and nutrient management and reducing sediment and nutrient runoff, etc. We are providing, through the LLS vehicle, providing incentives grants, but to take up Bob's point earlier in the day, they are incentives grants, and Hunter Water gives out community small grants, and that's fine. But I like the LLS approach of not just throwing money at people to solve a problem, but to get the landowners to buy into the project, to contribute some of their own money, whatever the proportion is, and that's what we did with the dairy project, and that's what we're doing with the Four Valleys project. So we contribute some money, the landowners contribute some money, they've bought into the project, it's an incentive for them to participate, and then hopefully they'll do the work, the neighbours will see it, and then that will steamroll throughout the community. In answer to your question, in terms of the Seam Whippool project, I've been working on the Seam Whippool project for 20 years. I've only been at Hunter Water for 16. It's a collaboration between Hunter Water, Transport for New South Wales, the two councils and local land services. The relationship between us and Transport has been tense at times. It's been all about funding, and it requires ministerial approval, and we haven't been able to agree, and that's why it's taken 6 years to get it up and running. We've thought about, we were at a point, Hunter Water that is, was at a point, we've persisted and we've got an erosion management plan. It's been approved by the Minister, it's been exhibited, and it's been finalised, and we're working towards implementing it now. But our fallback position was, I hope there's no journalists in the room, that we were just going to go it alone. If we, at a point, we're going to draw a line in the sand at a point in time and go it alone with the landowners if we couldn't get that agreement. But we've stuck it out and we've persisted, and we have to collaborate with some of those other agencies. And the thing with the weir pool, like the lower section of the river, is that there are boats on the river. They've been there for a long time. There's no political appetite to take the boats off the river. So irrespective of what might be the best thing for the river, we have to live with the fact that the boats are on the river now. And so that's the reality of it. And we've had to work through that interagency process in order to make it happen. If we didn't have that complication, we could have done it a different way, which is what we're doing everywhere else.
Hi. Just a question for you, Matt. I'm curious to know what methods you, I guess, endorse or support for weed management in those high priority areas, and how do you ensure they're safe for the ecology of the river? Thank you.
Hey, so I come from a bush regen background, so I always go for myself on a minimal impact method, but you've also got to think I was paid to do a job, so I've always gone bang for buck as well. So you've got to find a line between what is economically feasible for a landholder versus what they're willing to do. So I won't recommend anything. I would more get a landholder to talk me through what they're trying to achieve, look at what methods they're currently using and why they're not getting the results they want, and then try and recommend something that'll fit what they're wanting out of their system versus how much money they're willing to put into it as well. So, but coming from that, I'd always go for, well, if you can achieve the results with minimal impact, well, then you use minimal. But if you need the results quicker and you need that productivity bonus or you need that outcome, well, then you're going to have to go a higher impact being chemical or something else, or you can come in and slash rip burn and start the site from scratch even. So horses for courses would be my answer.
This is a question for Molly. I've been very critical of the fact for a while now that we don't have an EWAG. We've had a few EWAGs over the years, and EWAGs tend to get formed in the middle of a dry time. An Environmental Water Advisory Group. So it's a group of stakeholders that sit down and discuss how environmental water might be used. So for me, it's a fundamental part of managing rivers. It happens across regulated streams across the rest of New South Wales. And we do not have one in the Hunter or Paterson. There was talk of splitting it. I think it's a great idea that the Paterson and the Hunter are a combined EWAG. The other criticism I have, and I find it hard to get the information on, is environmental monitoring. So the level of monitoring you just showed on the screen, that is excellent. But what is the monitoring between the last environmental water release that happened in 2020 and the one that you've done in June 23? The environmental monitoring pre-June 2020, like when did that happen? There's very little information made available to people in the community about the environmental monitoring that takes place, and I get the impression that it's a very narrow window of monitoring. It needs to be a more sustained environmental monitoring process.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I guess one of the things I'm going to focus on is making sure that that monitoring is posted on that website in one of the slides that I showed earlier. In terms of the monitoring filling the gaps between the 2 years, unfortunately there was none with this particular technology. But I've got some friends down the back in DPE Water that are doing some very sophisticated environmental monitoring for the entire Hunter catchment, including things like eDNA. So that particular method, using the Didson sonar camera for traversing the weir, wasn't done in between releases, but there's definitely lots of monitoring which is going to be, which I think the guys already published that on their website. Yeah. Yeah. Forwarded on to Dan at the back.
John, in view of the anticipated very dry period, or next year, very dry all year, what's the idea with the desal plant? Will that come on stream next year or the year after?
That's a good question. I know it's being built. I'm certainly, that's one of the projects I'm not managing. I can't tell you the scheduled commissioning date, but so Hunter Water is one of two major utilities in New South Wales, and one of the only major utilities around the country with a major population centre that doesn't have a desal plant. And Hunter Water decided to go down that path as part of the water security plan for the future of the Lower Hunter, which is apart from with the Gold Coast as the largest population centre outside the capital cities. So water security is a big issue, and that was the reason to decide to build a desal plant. But that's one aspect of the future water security plan, along with a raft of water conservation measures and this future scheme that I talked about in the Paterson River to cater for growth. So the Belmont desal plant is being built, and that's kicking off now. I can't tell you what the commissioning date is, but that is happening. It's a fairly long-term build, so it'll take at least a couple of years to build it, and won't help us this summer. at least, but it's being built with a view to future water security, and there are plans for a potential second desal plant if needed. But the problem with desal plants is that they do take a long time to build. They involve a lot of technology. They're very costly to run. It'd be better if we didn't need them, but we need to balance water demands with management of the water in the environment, and desal's been decided as the way to go to meet the future water security needs.
Sorry, down here. We've got one over here. Yep.
Molly, in revegetation areas in the riparian zone, sometimes it might be more efficient to, rather than cart water in for watering, to pump water out of the stream. I was just wondering, from what I can see in the regulations, there's an exemption from licensing for that pumping for environmental construction works. And I'm not clear on whether that covers that sort of soft engineering, basically, when you're doing revegetation. I was just wondering if that fits in at all with what you're talking about with environmental water release, whether that could be classed as, sort of taken out of that allocation, or if you know about the licensing exemption side of things.
I don't know about the licensing exemption things, but yes, the EWA can be used for things like that for sure. So another project I'm working on with Trish and Katie from DPE is on River Red Gums, and we're trying to figure out a way, exactly like you said, to actually use a bit of that water to help restore those areas. So let's chat more.
This question mainly for John and Molly. One of the most common misunderstandings or lack of understanding amongst the community is the management of water. I mean, land tenureship is really easy. There's a land boundary, someone owns it, someone manages it. But with water, it seems to be very confusing, and one of the most common questions we get is who owns that, who manages it, who regulates it, what legislation covers that area. And I don't know the answer exactly, but I was thinking, how do we have a clear message for the community as to who owns what, who manages it, who regulates it, how does it, what legislation does it come under, things like that.
I'll throw it back to you. My bit's easy. Molly used to work for Hunter Water, so I'll throw it to Molly. Like I said before, Hunter Water is a major utility. We're a state-owned corporation, and we have a licence to use water. We have a major utility licence, so we have a preferential treatment. Some people don't like that, but Hunter Water's there to supply water services to the lower Hunter population, so we're recognised as a major utility. But in the end, we have a water access licence, and we pay tens of thousands of dollars to Water New South Wales per year for it, and that's sort of the end of it for Hunter Water. Other than to say, and Molly can add her bit, that yes, it is complicated, but I mean, I don't want to just refer people to the Water Management Act, but that's where it sits, and the water sharing plans that are devolved from the Water Management Act is where the water allocations are identified as to how much water is available for different security users and how much should be available for the environment. But from Hunter Water's perspective, it's an interesting question, Henrietta, because whilst Hunter Water is a major user, we still don't want people to waste it. Hunter Water's customers are paying for the water, and they're also paying for the assets. And building a desal plant, for example, is a huge, and operating a desal plant is a huge cost. And if people didn't waste it and didn't use so much, then maybe we wouldn't need to build all of those assets. But the bottom line is, people do waste it. And we can educate people, or we can try to educate people, but that's the reality of life that we have to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I don't know the answer of how we fix how complicated it is, because you're right, it's crazy. DPE water makes the rules, Water New South Wales releases the water, NRA regulates it, we get a small section for the environment. There's so many players. And I was at an ACAG meeting, a community advisory group meeting for Water New South Wales with a lot of the water users, and they said the same thing. They were like, there's so many people here and we don't know what you all do. So perhaps we could take that as an opportunity to try and figure that out after today, because you're right, it is so confusing.
Sounds like a good workshop session at the next forum. I'm going to invite, if there's no more questions... Oh, one more.
Thanks. Helen Stacey, Local Land Care. Maybe Matt, there's been some publicity on TV about some dogs chasing a weed. What is that weed, and is it a bad one? Thank you.
If that came out last week, it would be Chinese violet, and it would be the dog... Yeah, Indigo Environmental's training up a detector dog to use for Chinese violet detection in the Hunter. Chinese violet's a control order species, so must be eradicated on all lands across the entire state. Hunter's got the most of it. It started in a nursery down in Newcastle, more or less. That local contractor, she's training that dog up so that it's a very tricky plant to find. It's a scrambling vine. So it'll make its way under vegetation, but that dog's helping us to detect it on either sites where we don't quite know the extent, or where we've been working on a site and we've got it down to, we don't believe there's any left, and we've been working on it and there's no seedlings found for 5 years. We're using it as proof of freedom detection to make sure to confirm what we believe. We use the dog and its nose to do that. So I believe the first trial run was ran last week, and we'll have another demonstration in December and hit the ground running next year with that dog. And there's probably more relevant for the Hunter. It happens every year here in the Upper Hunter, out of Musselbrook and up towards, up towards Beltree's Way. There's Parthenium weed. And the same deal, we use detector dogs. The Parthenium weed's prohibited matter. That means it's not allowed to establish in New South Wales and must be continually eradicated out. Coming from Queensland, that detector dog does proof of freedom detections on those sites and is actually indicated on a seedling or a patch of dirt where the weeds officer said there's nothing there. They come back, sure enough, a month later, and there was a seedling of Parthenium there. So those dogs are very handy in detection and proof of freedom.